Good morning. Good morning. So I did the lesson plan, and basically what I'm just covering from the beginning is the unit plan, the unit of study, and the lesson plan, how I would create it, and then some of the lessons that I would do for it. So I decided to pick one unit, and I picked my unit based upon the standard. So I chose middle school because that's the subject that I would like to teach. So the unit of study, the unit plan, I'll go over that first, will be the Civil War and Reconstruction. And this is for middle school, so that's social studies. So what I did in the lesson plan was I had to create a title. I picked the title, which would be the United States Civil War and Reconstruction. But what I wanted to say is that I picked my unit from the standards. So in social studies, the standards are broken down. So for social studies, there's really, I think, 5 or 6 units that we could actually do. And then from that unit, I created all of the lessons. So the main unit would be students would examine the cause and courses and consequences of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And the goal is they have to find the effects of American people. That's the CCONs. That would be I'll show you in a second, the main standard. And then under that, they have additional standards that it breaks down into. So this is what I was talking about. So in CCOMs, they have the first standard, which is SAA 5.1. This is what they have to do, explain the consequences of the Civil War, sectionism, slavery, and balance. And then they have more standards. There's a total of, for this unit, there's a total of 8 standards. So when I pick my unit, I pick them by standard. So the first standard, which I previously showed you, that's like the original standard for the unit. And then from there, I pick my 8 standards, which would take me I figured each standard would take a week to teach. So each standard would be taught each week. So to cover the entire unit, because that would be my unit plan. So week 1, I would cover the first standard. They would have to explain the cause, the courses of the Civil War, and students will define sectionalism, slavery, the rights, and the balances of power. That's what we would have to cover within the first week, within my unit. So I divided the standard, then I broke it into different, each one into a week. The next week, they would have to, according to the standard, and I used, notice I just copied and pasted the standard because I feel like in my lesson plan, because I'm just focusing primarily on the lesson plan, that I should identify what they are learning each week. So then this week 2, they would have to analyze the role of slavery and Civil War. So that's their goal. What I would have them do is to define the abolition movement, Nate Turner's Rebellion, Black Codes, Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, Uncle Tom's Cabinet, Kansas and Nebraska Act, Dred Scott versus December. So all of these things, that would be the goal for that week. So that's what we would cover within our lesson plans. And I break my lessons down into simple ways. But that second week, they would have to know all those terms. In picking terms, I always make sure that the students master and learn the terms that's required within the standard. Because you know, when you have your textbook, you have a variety of different and I like that because as I look at their tests in the future, they do have to master that content as well as having enrichment, but I do focus on that when additionally creating my standards as I create my lessons. Week 3, this is actually the third benchmark within the unit for myself. They would have to, now standards change. Sometimes you have to define things and how you go over the different levels. So they've already defined this one, they would have to explain it. And I see that the state standards already do break them down in levels when they originally start. So here they would have to explain the major domestic and international economic, military, political, social things. And then they have words. They always have words to define. And I know I put define, but if you look at your standards, in the standard, and I can go back to it, they have words underneath it where I think it says other or something. But that's where I pull the vocabulary from for my lessons, for the standard, so that I make sure the students cover it. And then they would have to define it. So they have 2 things. They have to explain the major differences, and they still have to define the key terms that they would have to learn in that lesson for their standard. Week 4 is the same way, it's coming from the standard, but now they're having to, which is really low, they just have to identify the Confederate, the Union of States, Western theories, the United States, and the outbreak of the Civil War. So that will be the objective for my students that following week. Week 5, compare and contrast. Compare the Union, the Confederate strengths. Students they have vocabulary again. Define technology, resources, and alliances. So that will be their next terms. And then what they would do is compare and contrast. So I pick my lessons based upon the standard. So now you can use like a compare and contrast chart or different things, but that's how we'll pull them from. Here's the same thing. Their goal is to know how to compare something, the Civil War battle and events against the effect of the population. And again, they have to define some words, so Fort Summer, Bull Run. Those are the key things that they will focus on defining. Week 7, the same thing, I pulled it from the standard. They would have to examine key events, people in Florida, because in civics and in Florida, in the state of Florida, we always have to incorporate Florida into our lesson. So for week 6, we'll be focusing on the people in Florida and the impacts they had during that Civil War, and that would include slavery, the planters, the secession, the Confederate membership, women, children, and pioneers in the environment, and then the regiment, and then the battle at the Natural Bridge. So that will be the next part of the lesson. One thing about history, time is everything. So planning is important because that's how you're able to, within a time frame, meet all those standards and benchmarks, and at the same time do all the creative things that I would like to do in the class. Week 8, as it goes towards the end, the recommendation or the level of somebody help me. What is that?
Complexity.
What is it? The level of complexity goes up higher. So now we're towards the week 8, we're wrapping it up, and now they have to explain and evaluate. And I'm thinking about this chart that we have. We have the different levels. The one is like you recall.
Bloom's taxonomy.
Bloom's taxonomy. So it's kind of like the standards are already going up in Bloom's taxonomy. So now they're explaining and they have to evaluate, kind of like analyzing. But they've already covered the previous things, so they have to, consequences of Reconstruction, they have to define the presidential, congressional, the Reconstruction period. They have to define and know the definition of the Ku Klux Klan, failures of radical reconstruction. So those will be some of their key terms towards the end as we go over this lesson. So to create my unit plan and my lesson plan, I use CPOMs. And I just want to show you a copy of what that, let me see if I can see here, of what it actually looks like. Oh, I did this.
Yeah, CPOMs is your friend. So you have to say that constantly.
So for the unit of study, and I just want to just make it simple, I made it this way, and this is how I pulled my basic standard. And then these are the standards, but it's under each benchmark. And like each unit, and for civics, I think there's a total of 5 major units, and then the unit is broken down. So there's Civil War, and then each week I just plan to break it down, and that would be my unit of study lesson plan. For the actual lesson, to plan it out, to create it, let me just move forward. Where was I? So now the lesson plan is where I start. I already have the unit plan, meaning that I know what I'm going to do for the next 8 weeks, which will probably be the last lesson. So then you have to do an individual lesson plan, what I'm going to teach. I'll figure out the materials I use. In some instances, like I like how you tell the page number that they have to do and to do their assignments. I'll use the textbook, and then I also will use computer programs, videos, a projector to teach the lesson. And then I like history.com. I am not a fan of YouTube because sometimes I have to fact check it. I like to use sources that I know are already approved and already been fact checked. And then I like to use CPOMs because their videos have already been approved and already been fact checked by the state. I like iCivics as well because I don't want to have to introduce misconceptions with YouTube. So these are the sources that I prefer to use. And this is what I would use within my lesson plan. The overview, the way I would teach it or the way I plan my lessons, that's called, many of you have probably heard of it, BDA. So for this entire unit to teach all of them, I'll use BDA. So that means before the lesson, during the lesson, and after the lesson. So before I teach the lesson, every day they'll have like what we call like a warm-up or something that they set up. The first thing they would have to do a mini lesson. The goal, they would either have to predict, review, or define the Civil War period. And CNN, I use CNN as well. And there, I show the video clip for 10 minutes. I could probably do it one per lesson. And within that, they have to use the current vocabulary that we're working on. So those terms that they would have to define, they would have to use that vocabulary in their summary, and that works. So with the Civil War, if on CNN there's like a current war going on in the United States, they would use those terms to explain and write a summary. So that way the students are not only connecting the past, but they're connecting the past to the present. And that has been very successful because when I read their summaries, they're using the actual vocabulary and they're connecting it to present events that's currently happening in our country. Then I have them read, write, draw, listen to audio, lecture, book, film, text about the Civil War. That's during the lesson. So within my lesson, I have a variety of different strategies that I use. Sometimes it's textbook, sometimes a video or audio, but that is what the kids will do after their introduction. Then during the lesson, that's what they would do. After the lesson, I have them reflect with either reading and writing, a drawing, audio, a lecture, a book, a film, but it'll be based upon that topic, the Civil War and the Reconstruction period, but based upon that lesson. And finding a variety of lessons is easy. It's just BDA I just laid out. But my key thing is that they will do each of these throughout the lesson. And it's already structured for them, so kids like routine. So even though it's a variety of different things going on, they are aware of the routine.